Sultan Suleiman II was the 22nd Ottoman Sultan and the 85th Caliph of the Muslims. He was born in 1642, a time when the empire's foundations still stood firm, but storms of division were beginning to form. When he was only 6 years old, his father was deposed and executed. His older Sultan Mehmed imparted the throne, and the young Suleiman was confined to the prince's quarters of Topkapı Palace. For nearly 40 years he lived in quiet seclusion. He was denied the education and military training once expected of Ottoman princes. Yet, despite this isolation, he turned to learning. He studied the sciences, religion, and the art of statesmanship, training his mind in silence while others ruled and fell. He was the prince who waited the longest in Ottoman history before ascending the throne. When Sultan Mehmed IV was deposed after a military coup in 1687, Suleiman II was 45. As soldiers entered his quarters to proclaim him sultan, he is said to have whispered, "If our execution is ordered, let me first perform to rack auf prier. It is better to die at once than to live like this for 40 years. He inherited a nation in turmoil. War raged on the Austrian and Venetian fronts. In the west, the empire's enemies united with the single aim of driving the Muslims from Europe. The treasury was drained. Discipline in the army had collapsed. Rebellions broke out in Istanbul and in Rumelia. When the Janissaries and rebellious soldiers seized the capital, they surrounded the mansion of the Grand Vizier Siyavu Pasha. The Pasha fought until his last breath, killing 100 rebels before being slain himself. The rebels installed Nizing Ismail Pasha as the new Grand Vizier and demanded the head of Kaypruluzad Faz el Mustafa Pasha, the deputy vizier and son of the legendary KPRL Mehmed Pasha. They feared his strength and loyalty to the Sultan. To save his life, Sultan Suleiman quietly sent Fazl Mustafa away to the Dardanelles to serve as guardian of the Straits. But the rebels grew bold, looting the city and threatening the palace. Then something extraordinary happened. A merchant whose shop had been plundered took a white cloth, tied it to a spear, and called the people of Istanbul to rise up against the rebels. The ulama and the preacher of Suleimani mosque joined him. Tens of thousands of citizens filled the streets, chanting for justice. When Sultan Suleiman raised the royal banner in front of the palace, symbol of the Prophet's army, the rebels lost heart and fled. Order was restored, and those who led the rebellion were hunted down and punished, but peace did not last long. In the Balkans, fortress after fortress fell. Eger, Belgrade were lost. Entire Muslim communities were wiped out. When Eger was taken, 47 mosques were destroyed, and only a single minaret remained to mark centuries of Islamic rule. In Sikesfjärvar, the Strathovenstedt, even the banners and cannons of the Ottomans were sent to the Pope as trophies. Amid these disasters, the Sultan sought help from Allah and guidance from wise men. He was deeply pious, standing whenever the name of Allah or the Prophet Muhammad was mentioned, never missing a prayer. He wept for the losses of the Ummah, praying that the Muslims might rise again. While the Western Front crumbled, the armies in Poland and Russia gained victory with the help of the Crimean Tatars. In the Mediterranean, Venice occupied Athens and Morea, oppressing both Muslims and Orthodox Christians alike. Thousands of Greeks, unable to bear the Venetians' rule, fled to Istanbul seeking refuge under the justice of the Ottoman Caliphate. In 1689, the Sultan decided to lead a campaign himself, though ill and frail. He marched as far as Sofia, but the harsh journey and his worsening sickness forced him to return. When Niz and Vidin fell soon after, the son recupéré Efazet el-Mustafa Pasha. Fez, el-Mustafa Pasha, son of the great family, was brought back and made Grand Vizier with full authority. He immediately began reforming the state. He abolished unjust taxes that had crushed the poor, restored discipline to the army, and revived the timur land system that supported the Sipahi cavalry. He confiscated the ill-gotten wealth of corrupt officials, filled the treasury, and ordered the palace's gold and silver to be melted down for coinage. The people began to breathe again. Even foreign ambassadors wrote that the Ottoman Empire was rising once more. When he had restored the strength of the army, Fazl Mustafa Pasha launched a campaign in 1690. By Allah's help, Niz, Vidin, Smederevo, and Belgrade were retaken. The flag of Islam was raised again on the walls of Belgrade, but the city was empty. Its people had fled, and the once Turkish stronghold became a foreign land. Still, the Pasha's justice won hearts. He pardoned Christians who had sided with the enemy and even distributed seeds and livestock to them so they might rebuild their lives. In Europe, fear spread. The courts of Vienna and Budin fortified their walls, knowing the Ottomans had risen again. But in 1691, as the army prepared for a new campaign, Sultan Suleiman fell gravely ill. His body swelled, and he could no longer stand. Yet, when the Grand Vizier departed for Hungary, the Sultan insisted on accompanying him as far as Eden. He prayed for victory, saying, "May Allah grant you conquest," as he granted it to my great-grandfather Suleiman the Magnificent. 8 days later, he passed away at the age of 49. His body was brought back to Istanbul in ice and buried beside Suleiman the Magnificent, the name he bore with honor. His reign had lasted just 4 years, but in those years, the empire regained its strength and its dignity. The chronicler Silidar Memdaga described him as a man of medium height, bright-faced and kind-hearted, generous and just, gentle yet resolute. He never turned away those who sought his help and rose to his feet whenever the names of Allah or his messenger were spoken. He endured pain in silence, bearing his illness as an act of devotion. He was a calligrapher, a poet, and a man of tasawwuf, a disciple of At-Pazali Osman, Effendi of the Holwati order. Though his rule was short, it was marked by revival. He repaired mosques, fortresses, and schools. He sent aid to the victims of famine and earthquake. And when he died, he left behind a treasury filled, an army disciplined, and a people who once again believed in the justice of their ruler. Sultan Suleiman II is remembered not as a conqueror, but as a restorer, the Caliph, who revived the order of the Ottoman world in its darkest hour.